Today's shout-out is to the Congregation Beth Shalom, whose Rabbi Seth Adelson will join us as our guest today. This episode was recorded 2 days after the one-year anniversary of the Tree of Life Synagogue massacre in Pittsburgh. 3 congregations lost members in that massacre. One of those congregations is the New Light congregation. Since then, Beth Shalom, where we recorded this episode, opened its doors to the members of the New Light congregation, sharing space with that congregation. With this in mind, the tragedy remains fresh in everyone's mind. Our condolences to everyone who was affected by the massacre. Our thoughts are with you this holiday season. As we look forward to the new year, if you have any thoughts or feedback, please send them to me through email at tim@shapingopinion.com. If it's easier for you, get in touch with us on Twitter or Instagram @shapingopinion. If you want, we can give you a shout out. And as always, thank you for listening. You're the reason we do this. This is Shaping Opinion, a production of O'Brien Communications. Rabbi Adelson, what's your favorite Hanukkah tradition?
Well, I really appreciate food, and so what I really love to do on Hanukkah is make what is referred to in Yiddish as latkes. Latkes are fried potato pancakes, and you can sort of personalize them. I mean, the standard recipe is potatoes, grated potatoes and onions. But I like to add cilantro and green onion as well. Get nice little flecks of green in there, but plus it adds a little extra flavor, a little salt and pepper, and you fry them, and really very tasty.
I'm Tim O'Brien. In this episode of the Shaping Opinion podcast, we're joined by Rabbi Seth Adelson. He serves the Congregation Beth Shalom in Pittsburgh. The premise of our podcast is simple. We talk about people, events, and things that have shaped the way we think. Today we'll talk with Rabbi Adelson about Hanukkah, its history, its traditions, and its meaning. It's often called the Festival of Lights, and it usually happens in November or December each year. It's the Jewish celebration of Hanukkah, and it takes place over 8 days. Hanukkah commemorates the rededication of the Second Temple in Jerusalem during the 2nd century BC. The story centers on the Maccabean Revolt, where the Jewish people had risen up against their Greek-Syrian oppressors. Rabbi Adelson tells the story of the meaning behind Hanukkah.
Hanukkah literally means dedication, and that speaks to the origin of the holiday. The holiday commemorates the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem, which was the focal point of all Jewish worship prior to its destruction at the hands of the Romans for the second time in the year 70 CE. CE is how Jews refer to AD, but we don't say Anno Domini in the year of our Lord, because that's a reference to Jesus. So we say CE, Common Era. So the Hanukkah story takes place in the 2nd century BCE, before Common Era, when the Hellenized Syrians, under the leadership of Antiochus, destroyed the temple, laid waste to it, desecrated it, and the Maccabees, in their victory over these Hellenized Syrians, after they clean up the temple, they rededicate it. And so the holiday is called Hanukkah, dedication, because it is a reference to that rededication of the temple.
The story began with Alexander the Great, and this was before the big events that we're going to be talking about. And Alexander the Great conquered Syria, Egypt, and what is now Palestine. And he allowed those lands to continue to observe their own religions. Now, 100 years later were the events that we're talking about. This is a turbulent phase in Jewish history. It was around 200, what we would say is BC. Alexander's successor was Antiochus, who at that time allowed people to practice under their own religions. His son was Antiochus Epiphanes. And he didn't see it the same way. According to history, when he took control, he outlawed the Jewish religion and ordered the Jews to worship the Greek gods. And around 168 and 164 BC, his soldiers attacked the Jewish people in Jerusalem, killing thousands and desecrating the city's second temple. And he erected an altar to Zeus, and he sacrificed pigs within its confines. So that was a further insult to it. And around that time, there was a priest. His name was Mattathias. He and his 5 sons led a full-scale rebellion against Antiochus and the monarchy. Mattathias died in 166, so this is all in the middle of this rebellion. And his son, Judah Maccabee, took the lead. In the next 2 years, the Jews were able to drive the Syrians out of Jerusalem using what they would describe as guerrilla warfare strategies. How did they win the battle? What did they do?
Well, so according to our tradition, of course, the Jews had God on their side. So it made sense that in the context of the events that you described, where they are fighting to regain control of the temple of Jerusalem, to remove the temple to Zeus, the idolatry that had been practiced in the temple, the reason that the Jews won is because, well, our one God wins out over idolatry, and that's always the way it goes in biblical stories. It's worth noting that the events that you describe are not actually in what we refer to as the Hebrew Bible, what Christians often refer to as the Old Testament, although we don't call it that because it's for us the only Testament, if you will. But we refer to it as the Hebrew Bible or the Tanakh. Tanakh is a Hebrew acronym for Torah, Nevi'im, Ketuvim, which means the Torah, the first 5 books, Nevi'im, the prophets, and the Ketuvim, the writings. But this story is not found in any of that. Rather, it's in one of the apocryphal books, the books of the Maccabees. It's found in the books of the Maccabees, which were not canonized in the Hebrew Bible, but appear in the Apocrypha. And actually, they're not in what Christians call the New Testament either. They're also Apocrypha means just the external books.
Would they be in the Talmud?
Some of the story is found in the Talmud. So the Talmud is a collection of Jewish wisdom, which is written down beginning in the basically 1st or 2nd century CE, so first or second century of the Common Era, and written until about the 4th or 5th century. And in that time, the Jews are already, it's after the Roman destruction of Jerusalem. Most of the scholars who are writing this Talmudic literature, rabbinic literature down, they start off in Yavne in Israel, but then the discussion goes in further centuries to Iraq, and it's in a couple of Jewish schools called yeshivot around Baghdad. And so the Talmud does have some stories about Hanukkah and about this episode of the Maccabees, but they're from this rabbinic perspective, which comes later. And so the rabbis don't even, to my knowledge, they don't talk so much about Alexander the Great versus Antiochus and that kind of stuff. They rather talk about the Hanukkah miracle, which is the miracle that when they go into the temple and they rededicate it for this Hanukkah dedication, they find the flask of oil, which should only last 1 day, but rather lasts 8 days. So that discussion is found in the Talmud, and they do not talk in the Talmud, to my knowledge, about the military victory by the Maccabees.
I didn't want to ask you about the miracle because that is the central piece of Hanukkah. Can you describe what the miracle was and what happened?
So in this process of rededication of the temple, of this Hanukkah, after they've won, the Maccabees and their friends go back into the temple. Of course, they find it in a desecrated state, and they start to clean up and rebuild and so forth. And they find this jug of oil. And the story is that the jug of oil looks like it's only enough to light the menorah, the lampstand in the temple for 1 day. Now, just a brief note about the lampstand. That is the menorah. That is actually described in the Torah as one of the implements of the Mishkan, the portable tabernacle that the Jews used, that the Israelites used in the desert before they come into the land of Israel. But then it's also used in the temple when they build this permanent temple in Jerusalem when it's built by King Solomon. And this would be, a good 900 years, 800 years before the Hanukkah story. So the temple's been there for a long time, and they have this golden lampstand that's lit for one candle for each day of the week. So it actually has 7 branches. Okay. And this flask of oil that they find is enough for one day. Lo and behold, they start using the oil, and there's enough oil for 8 days. Hence the miracle described in the Talmud, and hence the added celebration of lighting candles for 8 days. Now remember that I said that the lampstand, the menorah in the temple, had only 7 branches, one for each day of the week. The one for Hanukkah is actually, even though people refer to it as a menorah or a menorah, the one that we use is not the menorah that was not like the one that was in the temple, because that only had 7 branches. The one we use today for Hanukkah is called a Chanukiah, a Hanukkah menorah, Hanukkah lampstand, that has 9 branches, 8 for the 8 days of Hanukkah, and an additional one called the shamash, the servant candle, with which we light the other 8 candles.
There's a dedication ceremony that people follow when they remember that every year. Mm-hmm. You use the shamash. What is the ceremony like within someone's home? Who is the one who lights the candles? And I know there are blessings. Are there certain roles that family members play?
So let me just take a step back to talk about the framework of what we do in Judaism. That framework is called mitzvot. A mitzvah is a commandment or an obligation, something that we should do. And there are different kinds of mitzvot. There are mitzvot that we can do on a daily basis. There are mitzvot that have to fall during certain times, like prayer has to be during a certain time of the day. And there are different prayers for different days. A mitzvah, also an example of a mitzvah is on Passover, on the first night, we're required to eat a certain amount of matzah, this bread that has not risen. And the mitzvah of Hanukkah is to light these candles, one new one for each night. And also, there's an additional mitzvah, which is to publicize that miracle. It's called in Hebrew, or actually Aramaic, pirsume nisa, the publicization of this miracle. So what happens when you light the candle, and it doesn't have to be any one specific person, although if you're taking the mitzvah very seriously, perhaps everybody should have their own Chanukiah, where they light everybody over the age of majority, which is bar mitzvah age, the age of 13, should have their own. And the way it works is you take the shamash, you light the shamash, you recite the blessings. Would you like me to recite the blessings for you or sing them? Okay, so the first blessing goes like this. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddeshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu lehadlik ner shel Chanukah. Praise to you, God, who has made our lives holy with your commandments and commanded us to light the Chanukah light. That's the first blessing. The second one goes like this. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam she'asa nisim lavotenu bayamim ahem ba'zman hazeh. Praise to you, God, who performed miracles for us in the times of our ancestors and also in this time. So we say those 2 blessings, and then we take the shamash, the servant candle, and we light the candles in the Chanukiah according to the order of the newest light first. So remember, the first night we light 1 candle, and the second night we light 2, and they should be arranged in the Chanukiah so that the new one is on the right side. And then, the first one is on the right side, and they proceed to the left. But we light them we light the new one first. So we light from left to write. This is hard to see in radio, of course, or on a podcast. But yeah, there's an order for how we light them, and we always light the newest candle first. And then once they're lit, put them in the window for Pirsume Nisa, the publicizing the miracle. There's also, by the way, just as an aside, in the Talmud, there's a debate over should we start from since there are eight nights, do we light all 8 candles first and then decrease one each night? Or do we light 1 candle and then 2 candles the second night and 3 and on until the 8th night? So the 8th night you have 8 lit. That latter method is the way we do it today. And the reason we do it that way is because there's a principle in Jewish life called Ma'alin bekodesh ve'en moridin. We go up in holiness and we do not go down. So that is to say, since you're lighting more candles every night, you're going up, you're not going down. And by the way, and by the way, it's worth noting that is even though the tradition is to use candles or oil, that is also an appropriate way of fulfilling the mitzvah of Hanukkah. There's nothing, it's not a lesser, you're not doing anything wrong if you use the electric ones, is what I'm saying.
There are so many traditions for Hanukkah, and you mentioned one of them when I asked you earlier about your favorite food. Let's talk about the food. What are the other popular foods for Hanukkah?
So in recent years, I've often been in Israel during Hanukkah. And in Israel, the most common Hanukkah food is not latkes, the potato pancakes, but rather fried donuts that are called in Hebrew sufganiot. If you're in Israel, what happens during Hanukkah is you'll see donuts everywhere. The standard is a jelly donut, little jelly in it, but it's very common in Israel to see you walk by a bakery and they'll have just, it seems like thousands of different types of donuts with elaborate frosting designs and sprinkles and chocolate sauce and whatever. Very, very fancy and extraordinarily tasty as well. So that's another food tradition for Hanukkah.
What about beverages?
On certain holidays of the Jewish calendar, we mark the beginning and the end of the holiday by drinking a little wine. Wine being a sign of luxury, a sign of celebration. Ironically, Hanukkah, even though it's a happy holiday, it's actually not a very important holiday in the sphere of the Jewish year. So we do not actually mark Hanukkah by drinking a cup of wine for, as that sign of luxury and celebration. So I suppose if people have Hanukkah parties, they might serve, something to drink, but it could be anything.
It's not part of the religious practice of it.
Correct. There's no specific ritual or custom about that.
One of the things I learned in preparing for this episode was that because it's not such a major holiday, most of its traditions are in the home. Are there any traditions that are done more officially?
Yes. So it is customary not only to light Hanukkah candles in the home, but also many synagogues put out a Chanukiah, Hanukkah menorah outside, so that, once again, to fulfill that mitzvah of Pirsume Nisa. Also in the morning, it's worth noting that Jews have services 3 times every day. Here at my congregation of Beth Shalom, for logistical reasons, we have a morning service and an evening service that actually encompasses 2 services. But it is customary in the morning service to have the candles lit there during the service as well, just to remind everybody of that it's Hanukkah.
When did the practice of gift giving start, and who typically receives the gifts? Is it mostly children who receive the gifts, or is it now adult to adult gift giving?
I'm certainly not an expert in this, but my sense is, and I'm going to say this knowing that I could be completely wrong. So in my family, we did not get gifts when I was a kid, and I and what I was told was the custom was to give a little money. The Hebrew term, actually the Yiddish term is gelt. So you'd hear about Hanukkah gelt. You get a few coins. That often played out when I was a kid, not as actual coins, but chocolate coins. The kind in the foil. And so we often got little bags, and it was great because the Israeli chocolate's very good, and so if you get the Israeli, the brand is Elite. If you got those are the best chocolate coins. But yes, it became, I believe, a widespread custom in America. And I'm guessing in the 20th century, and probably not too much before that, because of Hanukkah's proximity to Christmas. And I'm a Jewish kid. I go to school, a public school, with a bunch of non-Jewish kids, Christian kids, and they're all getting presents on Hanukkah. And boy, don't I feel left out. And so the parents feel, I can make my kid feel a little bit better about not being, not celebrating Christmas by giving presents on Hanukkah. And I think that's where that custom came from. And so I'm guessing the middle of the 20th century, maybe earlier, I don't know, but I think it's probably a particularly American custom that is relatively new in the Jewish sphere.
Do you have a favorite memory of Hanukkah yourself?
Yeah, actually, what I do remember that I really enjoyed was the first synagogue that I really remember being a part of was in North Adams, Massachusetts. I grew up in Western Massachusetts, and we went to Congregation Beth Israel in North Adams when I was a little kid. We went later to the synagogue in Pittsfield, Massachusetts, which was a little bigger. It's funny that I now live in Pittsburgh, but I used to go to a synagogue in Pittsfield, Massachusetts. And I remember they used to have every year a Hanukkah dinner at the synagogue in North Adams. I think it was a dinner or maybe a brunch. I was really small, so I don't really remember what meal it was, but I remember the latkes, and I remember the singing, and I just remember singing. I remember these old mimeographed sheets, probably stained with food oil or whatever, that we'd pass around and sing these ridiculous songs about Hanukkah that were a lot of fun.
Do you have children?
I do.
What do you try to do with your kids?
We light the candles together. We do now give them, little presents. Maybe not every night, but
chocolate coins.
Yeah, and we always have chocolate coins around. I mean, look, everybody loves chocolate. I feel like when I was a kid, the availability of this chocolate seemed a lot less than it is now. I feel like there are chocolate coins everywhere, and everybody gives them out, so it's not as special maybe as it used to be. Because if you got one little baggie, it was a big deal.
Right. Well, that makes it a treat.
That's correct. Yeah, what kids today, they're getting chocolate wherever they go.
What about games? I know dreidel's a big game, and also a big song.
Yes. So the dreidel, my understanding of the dreidel is that it's some kind of medieval children's game. I don't know if it's just for children, but it's a four-sided top with letters on each side of the top, and those letters are, at least in diaspora, in Hebrew Nun, Gimel, Hey, and Shin. And that stands for a phrase associated with Hanukkah, Nes Gadol Haya Sham. A great miracle happened there. Interestingly enough, if you go to Israel, you'll see that the dreidels they're slightly different. Rather than Nun Gimel Hey Shin, it says Nun Gimel Hey Pei. And that last letter, Pei, stands for Po, which means here. So rather than saying a great miracle happened there, because we here in diaspora are talking about something that happened in Israel they say a great miracle happened here. And now in the Middle Ages in Europe, this game was a popular game to play, and the letters on the dreidel stood for four Yiddish words, which indicated what you do with sort of the pot of coins. Like I said, it was a gambling game. Either you put in or you take out, or you lose all your coins. Oh yeah, and you mentioned the song. I mean, I must say that as an adult, I must say it's not it's not such a the song ain't all that. I have a little dreidel. I made it out of clay, etc. It's for kids, but certainly is well known.
I asked you about your kids, but you have a role with your congregation here. What's your favorite part of Hanukkah as Rabbi Adelson?
So what I really love about Hanukkah in particular is the opportunity to be able to talk about the need to illuminate this world. We live in a world that we know to be fundamentally broken and in need of illumination in various quarters. And Hanukkah, symbolically, yes, it's about the miracle that happened in the temple, and yes, it's about the victory of the Maccabees over the Hellenized Syrians, Antiochus, and so forth. But as a rabbi, I always want to talk about, how does Judaism apply to us today? How do our ancient stories help us to be better people, to be better individuals? How do they help us to create a better world? And Hanukkah, because it's about casting light, because it's about lighting candles in dark times, reminds us of our essential obligations to make this world a better place, to make this world a place in which we cast more light, in which we illuminate the areas of the world that need to be illuminated, in which we make sure that we are reaching out to people in a way that elevates the holiness of this world, that we reach out to each other to build a community that is dedicated to spreading light, to enlightening the world, to making sure that we work to stamp out the forces of darkness, of hatred, of persecution, of oppression, of racism, of all of the isms that bring us down, and to try to lift this world up. And so, as a rabbi, my primary goal in this season is to remind us it's not just about, playing dreidel and lighting candles and getting gifts. It's about remembering that our essential role in this world is to emphasize the holiness that we have, that we can bring to others and to the world.
How would you describe your typical routine during Hanukkah as a rabbi?
I would say that because Hanukkah is on the second tier of holidays, in that it's not as synagogue focused. My daily routine, my routine in that time is not so different as it would be at other sort of normal times of the year. Hanukkah is, and again, this is sort of a dirty little secret of Hanukkah, which is that it's not a holiday on which we are, for example, forbidden to work, which, as we are on the Sabbath and on holidays like Passover and Sukkot and so forth. There are holidays that are set aside for going to synagogue, having family meals, certain particular rituals. Really, Hanukkah is, compared to those other holidays, it's relatively minor, and so I do all the things that on Hanukkah days, when it's not the Sabbath, when it's not Shabbat, I do the things that I usually do, which include teaching and writing and counseling and going to visit people in hospitals, and you can even there are all sorts of just the regular things that rabbis do. And
what are the universal teachings for people, whether they are Jewish or not, of Hanukkah?
I would say that the message of Hanukkah is universal, in the sense that we all have an obligation to spread a little more light. Judaism frames it as a Hanukkah as a victory of monotheism, of the one God over idolatry. While I wouldn't necessarily frame it that way for non-Jews, because of the fraught nature of theology, I would certainly say that we all have an obligation to conquer the idols in our lives. And I'm not talking necessarily about religious idols. I'm talking about, let's make sure that we're not making an idol out of our career or our livelihood. That we make sure that we dedicate ourselves to the values of family and the values of gratitude and compassion and treating others with respect and equality in our world. I think that's a universal message that should resonate with everybody.
Rabbi Seth Adelson, thank you for joining us today.
My pleasure.
To learn more about Hanukkah, the Festival of Lights, and our guest today, Rabbi Seth Adelson of Congregation Beth Shalom, please see our show notes at shapingopinion.com. If you enjoyed this episode, please let people know by leaving a rating and review in Apple Podcasts. You can subscribe to the Shaping Opinion podcast wherever you listen to your podcasts. We'd love to hear from you. On Twitter, just tweet to us at Shaping Opinion, or you can get in touch with us through our website, shapingopinion.com. We have a Facebook page, and we're on Instagram at Shaping Opinion. Shaping Opinion is a production of O'Brien Communications. This is where we talk about people, events, and things that have shaped the way we think. Until next time, I'm Tim O'Brien.